Thank you, Nick. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, our speaker will be Brenda. I think everyone knows Brenda. She's been with us for many, many years at Canando, and has been a really critical part of our community. She's been in many roles, in president, as well as I think she's been on the board, and she's been also active in our Abbott's Council. So she really does a lot behind the scenes. So welcome, Brenda. Do you have any a talk for today's title, or a title for today's talk? Sorry.
Yes, Buddhism and faith.
Buddhism and faith. Great. I'm going to spotlight you, so you're going to have to go back to gallery view if you want to see everyone.
Yeah, I think I will. Thank you. It's kind of scary.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see everybody. Thank you for coming with so much going on all around us. Thank you for coming tonight so we can share this time together. Today I would like to explore a little bit to you the question of belief or faith and Buddhism. I started thinking about this after several of our recent speakers brought up the question of belief. David Chadwick, in his recent talk with us, he said, belief will get you through the first gate, but not through the second. So I was intrigued by this, and I was going to ask him what he meant by that, but we ran out of time. There was so much going on with and I never got to ask him, but I started thinking about that question. And another time, our very own Giuseppe was talking about the wooden Buddha, and he mentioned that one of his sons asked him, what's the difference between Buddha and God? Isn't it the same thing? That was a good question. That's awesome. The answer to that, but it's a good question. Some of you may have heard how I got started on the spiritual path. I was raised an Orthodox Christian. And in the church, as I was raised as a child, I participated in many rituals, often involved standing for hours and chanting and bowing and praying. And there was really not very much explanation of what was going on. And but we would go, and we didn't go a lot, but we'd go Christmas, Easter, you had to be there. Like the whole country was where I was raised in Romania as a young child to be there. One time I asked my grandmother, Grandma, what's with all the stuff we do at church? And my grandma answered, she was a very sweet woman, very, very kindly. She said, believe and don't investigate. I said, well, Grandma, that doesn't work for me. And she said, I don't know, honey, that's what they told me when I asked. So you're gonna have to figure out the rest yourself. But, wow, so that's kind of how I got propelled on the spiritual path. That's how it began for me. So along the way in my investigations, perhaps related to these early experiences, I was attracted to some of the sayings of the Buddha, such as, work out your salvation with diligence, be a light unto yourself, take my teachings and apply them to your own life and accept what works. Or the Dalai Lama's saying, if Buddhism and science at some point are found to contradict, well then Buddhism must change. So I started thinking about my practice recently, perhaps in a more challenging way, and asking some of the hard questions. What does all this really mean to me? Not in some abstract terms, But as I sit on a cushion in my home, waiting for the next Zoom session to start, how do I relate to my own suffering? How do I create it? How do I resolve it? How am I at peace with it? Am I experiencing joy in my life? If so, how is that happening? So, and I started thinking that beyond anything we read or hear, a spiritual practice is about what is true for us, not as something, some kind of belief, but rather as something that we have experienced ourselves, that we have come to know in our bones, in our own words, in our own feelings and thoughts. So I was going to share a few things that have come up for me. As I sit on my cushion, I've noticed there are roughly 3 kinds of influences on my self-continuum, for lack of a better word. There's what I think, and there's plenty of that, you can be sure. Then there's what I feel, sometimes about what I think, or sometimes unrelated. Lastly, there's what I actually do. And that could be very different from either the first or the second. And there's this little dance that goes on between them. You know, it's very nonlinear. So I might think about something for a very long time, and then I might actually be surprised by how I feel about that thing, or about how it's connected to something else. And yet again, I might be even more surprised by what I actually do in some given scenario. Like, really? This is what I did. It's interesting. So modern psychology, they talk about this kind of these 3 and how that they're related. In fact, most of modern psychology is based on this. They call this cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's a relationship between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, you know, how they might relate to each other. And many times they might be at odds with each other. We might think about losing weight, but then when the time comes to actually take some of those actions, we find that we're not pieces. Many years ago, when we were too poor to afford with cable, so we only watched the 2 local channels that came on the TV, there was this Stanford professor who used to lecture in the middle of the night on Coptic. For some reason, I was always up at 1 in the morning when this guy was talking about giving Coptic lectures. And what I remember from those days was that strange that he kept saying a few times that when he was talking about faith, and he said, you know, I want to make it very clear that faith in Coptic is not an adverb. It's not a state. It's a verb. It's a verb. I remember, like, what the heck is that? Like, that's really strange. A verb? And then there's also, you know, in Judaism, there's also a book that says God is a verb. It's a book about the Kabbalah. So it's interesting. Maybe we're, you know, sometimes in translation, we lose some of the pieces, you know, from Buddhism to, it has been translated many, many times, and who knows? But at the end of the day, Buddhism is an embodied practice. The mind, spirit, and the body must move as one. We can only walk our own walk with our own 2 feet. Prajnaparamita, going beyond thoughts, concepts, feelings, even beyond the beyond, dropping off body and mind. Nature can help. Recently, I made a mistake and was feeling very down on myself. I went out to take a walk by the ocean. I looked at the sand as I was walking for a long time, and I felt I am like the sand, just a little part of this vast universe. Does a grain of sand make a mistake? Just go back to what you were doing. Stop thinking you're so important that you will not make a mistake. Truth, reality cannot be the province of one religion, but must be present in them all. I'm grateful for all my spiritual teachers over the years, and for our path, and for the guidance of our teacher Les. I'm grateful for what I've learned and for what I will learn. But at the end of the day, there's no learner and there's nothing learned. Form and emptiness can have many interpretations. Recently, I'm attracted to that of a cup and the liquid inside of it. You need the cup, the religious rituals, to taste the water of spirituality. You can try to drink without a cup, and it might work, but it might be a bit messy, and you might spill a bunch of it. It might be a little easier with a cup. But if you try to eat the cup, then it might not be so good for you. You might choke perhaps, or you might need some surgery. You need to sip gently. Take what you need, then put the cup down. You might also taste from other cups. Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Krishna, Lao Tzu. Or you could drink from the current, most recent experiment of the human cup of suffering that has made the whole world a monastery, the Corona cup. The Buddhist cup is a simple one, not ornate, functional, with a handle, no holes. It will work well to hold water for those who are thirsty. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. We'll now open it up for questions.
Giuseppe?
Hello.
I could talk about something else.
Teresa?
Hi, Brenda.
Hi, Teresa.
Thank you for your talk. I believe that recently, correct me if I am misquoting you, but I believe you said maybe at one of your latest talks that you were an unusual Buddhist in the sense that you believed in God. Is that right?
Yeah, I do.
And then maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it if you feel comfortable. I was intrigued, and I don't know why I didn't ask a question at the time, but it's kind of related to today's talk, I think.
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to. You know, I actually, I had the experience on a cushion one day. I was sitting, I was like, you know, there's so much outside of ourselves. There's so much complexity. How I came to feel like that there was a God of some sort was actually studying biology when I was an undergraduate at MIT many years ago. And we spent 4 years studying the cell and the incredible complexity of the systems in the cell that were known then. And that was nothing compared to what is known now, so many years later, about the functions of a cell. But there's a whole universe inside every single cell of our bodies. And I thought, man, like, how can that all be so organized and so functional at the end of the day? You know, there has to be a higher intelligence, a higher organizing principle, if you will. I mean, not some dude up there in the sky, but, you know, some kind of organizing fundamental energy or principle that's kind of guiding this. You know, I can't keep my kitchen clean, you know, without cleaning it regularly, right? So, like, there's got to be some organizing force. That's sort of how, a little bit, how I feel about it. Is that we're, you know, it's more than just our consciousness. We're part of it. We're part of it. Most recently now, I'm thinking that we're kind of, I think that it's kind of like an organism. It has like organicity. We're part of it. Everything is part of it. We're all swimming in it. It's kind of my, yeah. I don't know. I don't have any, there's no thesis, hypothesis that you can put out there and prove it. It's one of those things. Thank you.
Don, did you have a question?
Yeah, yes, I do, yeah. Or maybe it's a comment. You know, my thing was just the opposite discovery. The complexity of everything indicates to me that there isn't any intelligence behind it. It's been one long Rube Goldberg machine, and that's why it's taken so long, and that's why it's so complex, because it isn't intelligently done. And my experience, you know, what came to me when sitting sesshin one time was that nobody is doing this. This just kind of this is just kind of general effortless unfolding with absolutely no unfolder. You know, no one's doing it. And like I said, and the complexity of it all to me indicates a lack of intelligent design, so or intelligence behind it. So that's kind of the opposite of you. So it's weird. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
But thank you. I love your talk. It was great.
Thank you for that.
Dave, and then Diane.
So thank you for your talk, Brenda. I did have a question, but I just wanted to quickly react to what Don just said. You know, there's a lot of sort of popular feeling that human intelligence is the inevitable, you know, pinnacle of evolution, and everything is so wonderfully planned that it must be intelligent design. I heard a wonderful saying recently, which is, nature never relies on intelligence where habit and blind intuition, blind instinct will serve. Thought that was rather charming. So a long time ago, I remember hearing somebody say, in looking at this whole question of the role of faith in Buddhism, that, well, you know, if we look at the word faith in just normal conversation, there are kind of a couple of different things that we typically mean by it, right? One is faith in the sense of belief. You know, I believe what I was taught in school. I believe in, you know, science, the facts of science or whatever. And the other is faith. You know, I have faith that things will work out. I feel confident that things will work out. And those are really kind of two different things. I mean, you can sometimes find some connective tissue between them, but those are really two different things. And if you look at them in terms of religion, in Western religion, faith is definitely more tilted toward the notion of belief. You know, I have faith in God, I have faith in Jesus, I have faith in this and that or the other. And then from that set of facts, or factoids, as some people call them, you come up with things that you'll do based on those beliefs. And it seems like in Buddhism, it's sort of the other way around, right? Buddhism isn't so much a belief system, it's a practice. It's something you do. And there may be insights and beliefs that arise from that, but they're sort of secondary. And so in that sense, it seems to me that faith in Buddhism really is more like the second meaning in normal conversational terms. That is, it's confidence in your practice. And I liked what you said about the idea that getting what you think, what you feel, and what you do in harmony. I mean, in a sense, I think confidence in our practice perhaps means that our practice is the way to achieve that harmony. But I'm just wondering if this whole idea of faith as being confidence as opposed to belief, does that sort of resonate with what you were trying to say in different words?
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking, because it depends on, and I totally agree with you. I think that's, you know, a sense of like your own confidence in moving forward. Probably, sometimes I think confidence is that like, you think you're going to achieve a certain outcome, right? Like, I'm confident I can drive from here to Palo Alto. You know, so it's like, it's related to some action. And I think that, I'm not sure that, right, that's not what you mean, not that kind of confidence, that I'm confident that I can do this, right? It's more like I'm confident that I can be this or be, you know, it's more related to a state, I guess, or to a way of being, maybe?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Well, I certainly wasn't trying to in any way talk about confidence in the sort of cliche way of, you know, you can do anything if you really set your mind to it, you know?
Right.
The thing that pops into my mind whenever somebody says that is, okay, flap your arms and fly. Just, you know, if you have enough confidence, maybe it will work out. I mean, you know, having confidence in general isn't always a reliable thing. You know, I've known some people who have gotten into some very serious trouble because they had the wrong kind of confidence, overconfidence, I guess we call it. The Germans call it Übermut. You know, I was just trying to say that in terms specifically of the role of faith in Zen, I think fundamentally it's the notion of confidence in our practice. And that, I would argue, is not unfounded, inappropriate.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. I totally agree. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Diane?
Thank you, Brenda. You gave us a lot to think about. Like you, I grew up with a religious practice, a Catholic. You said you were Orthodox, but lots of ritual. And there was sort of an innocence when I was a child of thinking of God as a father, an actual physical being. And I realized that a lot of adults, intelligent, educated, thoughtful adults, still think of God in that way, like a heavenly father who's there to protect you. And I envy, in a way, people that have that kind of blind faith that, you know, someone's there to take care of me and to do it for me. So I heard you say that there's a thought that God is a verb. So could you talk more about that, and what does that mean for you, God being a verb?
Oh gosh, I'm still learning about that. I don't know exactly, but I think it's along the lines of that it's becoming, that the universe is constantly becoming and creating itself, and it's and recreating itself, and one of the things that I've learned from talking with some of my friends who are Jewish, is that the phrase "I am that I am," it actually is something called Ayeh Asher Ayeh, which is "I will be what I will be." It's a little different than like it just kind of was translated. I will be what. So it's this idea of, I think it kind of what you were saying, Dawn, about becoming, this constant becoming, that it's, and that so that's part of it. Yeah, you know, and that we can participate. We're participants in that dance, in a sense, you know, but it's not all up to us.
Yeah.
We can, it's much bigger than us. I think that's really my idea of around God. It's like, it's a lot bigger than what I can conceive.
That's sort of not knowing mind.
Yeah, I think so. You know, there's another little piece, thank you. There's another little piece I didn't mention, which is many years later, I went back to the Orthodox Church after practicing Zen for some years. And I was visiting, you know, around Easter, and they said, "Oh, off we go to church." Okay. And we hung out in the, you know, for several hours for the service, and I realized that basically it was very similar to meditation, because you're standing there for hours, there's chanting, you're just kind of entering meditation. You're not talking, you're kind of looking, sometimes you're kneeling and so forth. And it's really not that different. I felt like I just sat there and meditated for a few hours. So maybe the rituals were really meant to kind of create a meditative sense inside of us as well.
That makes sense. Yeah.
We have Giuseppe and then Nick.
Hi, Brenda.
Good
morning.
Good morning.
So how would you answer the question of your child? What is the difference between God and Buddha?
Okay, what I would say, I've thought about this. I would say Buddha was a man who, you know, taught about spirituality and the way to walk a path, the Buddhist path, or path of spirituality. I think God is actually closer to, you know, when we talk to prajna paramita, you know, when you talk about beyond, going beyond thoughts, beyond feelings, beyond everything, I think prajna paramita is God. Which you might have to explain to them what prajna paramita is.
I have another question or actually more a comment on your point about faith and the conversations also with Dave about faith. I think, you know, when I think of faith in Buddhist terms, I think of what happened. For me, faith is faith in practice, faith in sitting. So when I think of myself, that I need more to do something more in terms of my practice, is like to just believe that sitting will work. For me, will work for everybody. That I can just abandon myself into sitting, which is actually the theme of the week, of course, because this week, so what comes to my mind for in this example of trust in faith in practice is the moment where Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, this week, but 2,500 years ago, said, "Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna sit now." Okay, and then he said through this week, you know, the famous story of his enlightenment. So I think that's my vision of faith, which I think is really important. That could be called trust. It could be called trust in practice, or maybe trust in mind. So how do you relate to the sitting practice right now?
I think that's right, Giuseppe. I think that's right. I think you can trust the sitting practice. Kind of like Dogen says, you know, sitting the self upon the self. I think that's that. Like the mind, the body, the emotions, getting everybody just in one place on that cushion, you know. I think it's important. Sometimes we can be a little too rigid in our practice. I think there's a tendency to, you know, we inherited this Japanese practice, and that can be really good for some people. And I don't know if there's maybe some people where it just gets too much, you know. So I think you have to find the right temperature for you. I think we're each a little different, and maybe even at different times we need a slightly different temperature, you know. I think that's the danger of rigidity. You can get too loose in your practice, too relaxed, too casual. You can be too rigid. So it's finding where's that balance, and only each of us can answer that for ourselves, I think.
Nick?
Brenda, thank you for your talk, and thank you for the beautiful explanation about what faith is for Zen Buddhist practitioners. My question, I grew up in the South, in the Bible Belt, and then I lived for many years in the Midwest. And in those two particular regions of the country, there is a very, very strong and unique flavor of faith. And I think we've seen in the past 4 years the extent of what that very strong flavor of Christian evangelical faith is. And I remember when I relocated to the Bay Area, I had huge culture shock. And I think a lot of it was because the evangelical Christianity in the South and in the Midwest, not only does it dominate a lot of people's private and personal lives, but it also dominates the public life too. And so in many ways, we're lucky living on the West Coast that it's not dominating the communities that we live in. But my question is, as practitioners, we do have to be and function in this world. And so how do we meet people who are, how do we meet them? How do we approach them who are coming with this type of faith?
You know, with respect, and was it Mushin? Is her name Teresa? I say, tell me more. You know, tell me more. Help me understand. You know, and I had a strange experience once in Texas. You know, that gave me pause. Which I was in an airport traveling between meetings and stuff, and bookshop is often where I end up, right? So I've sitting looking at the bookshop, trying to find something interesting. And this woman walks up to me and says, "Excuse me, I'm sorry for bothering you, but the spirit tells me that you're going to be able to help me. I said, oh, really? Okay, what's going on? She said, well, I'm going to visit my sister who has very severe breast cancer, and I don't know how to help her. And I thought, somehow I think that you might be able to help me know how to talk to her and what to say to her. I said, matter of fact, I do. I basically gave her a 45-minute consultation about how to integrative medicine and how to talk to somebody who has, you know, advanced cancer, and wrote out some things for her. This. We went through it. She said, thank you very much. Bye-bye. And I was like, wow, what just happened here? This woman just totally out of the blue. So, you know, life is interesting. Life is interesting if you just kind of, so I think we need to stay open. That's kind of my feeling, is we don't know everything. We know what we do, we sit, but there's a whole lot there that we may not be aware of, you know. So I think we have to respect that there's different paths. There's different, you know, it's sort of like the elephant. The universe is the elephant, and we are like, you know, one person has the front, the trunk, and the tail, and, you know, there's different pieces of this puzzle. So we have to have humility.
Thank you so much, Brenda.
Brenda, I have a question, comment. So I've been thinking a lot about this, about people's concepts of God and the different versions of God and gods that exist. And I couldn't help but realize that, I mean, here in the United States, where it was, you know, mostly English settlers, you know, the main concept of God is like a Caucasian male with a long beard sitting up on a cloud. And that's just what we think. I mean, even just today, I had a conversation with my sister, and she wants a nativity scene. So we were raised Christian, but she's like, I want an authentic nativity scene, like a historically accurate one where they're Middle Eastern and not white. And I was like, good luck finding that. So I noticed there's that. But then if you go to other cultures, like the Yoruban gods, they're Black, you know, because they're worshipped by people in Africa. And, you know, if you look at some of the Asian gods, or I don't know if you call them gods or just, you know, venerated beings, but like Kuan Yin, well, you know, Asian. And then there's Kennen, you know, Japanese version. And then there's, you know, the Greek gods, where they had lots of, you know, affairs and things and were very relatable. And I just realized that it seems like the gods of every culture. Oh, and then there's the Hindu gods. They look Indian. You see a pattern here? So I noticed that the gods people worship tend to look like them. And, you know, while typically we think of gods as being the creators of human beings, I can't help but think, well, maybe the human beings are the creators of the gods. And but that doesn't make them any less real, because if you think about the gods, like the Hindu holidays that happen, and if you think about like Christmas that happens, if you think about like the rules and the laws of the time, like the 10 Commandments and the Jewish law, just because they're kind of created by people and culture, it seems, doesn't make them any less real. Like, to me, it seems like that they have a huge impact, right? So sorry, it's a bit of a tangent. So I was wondering, you know, I know this is very heretical, but this is my honest thinking, that, you know, people create gods. And I was just wondering what you think about that. Like, do our gods reflect us and our state of mind and our spirituality? And I also really liked what you said about Prajnaparamita being God, because that is the wisdom beyond wisdom, right? Just like that woman could find you. Like, it's the knowing without knowing. It's the, sorry, am I frozen? Oh, am I freezing a little bit? Sorry, it looks like my connection is dying.
Come back. I just wanted to remark that what she just said most recently echoes a quote from Hanuman let's see, who was it? There's some famous guy who said, God created man, and man, being a gentleman, returned the favor. It was Rousseau who said that, I think. Yes.
Nice.
All right, I apologize, Brenda. I just moved. This is my first time using this Wi-Fi connection, and it seems a little bit flaky. So sorry about that. But the last thing I just said is that I loved your analogy of Prajnaparamita, and that, you know, it's the wisdom beyond wisdom and the knowing without knowing.
But can you, Bonnie, we just lost, you know, you were talking about the nativity scene, and then you went and said some things that you kind of froze for us. Would you mind repeating that piece of it?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Wow, you lost a couple minutes.
Yes, yes.
I was just saying, yeah, so my sister was looking for an authentic nativity scene, which would be Middle Eastern, right? Not white. And then, and I noticed that, you know, they don't exist here in the United States, right? But I also noticed with other cultures, there are, you know, the Yoruban deities, and they look black because they're worshipped by Africans. There are the Hindu deities. They are Indian because, you know, they're worshipped by Indian people. There are, you know, the European deities, the Greek and the Romans, and they all of the deities look like the people who worship them. And so that led me to think that it's the people that create the gods, and that the gods are a reflection of human consciousness and spirituality, but also that doesn't mean that they're less real, because it still impacts every aspect of our society. And so I was just wondering, you know, what do you think about that? About, because you say you believe in God, it's like, well, there's all these versions of gods. And I guess actually I would add something to it. It's like, well, maybe there's this thing called, you know, wisdom beyond wisdom, absolute truth, everything, omniscience, omnipotence, whatever you want to call it, omnipresence. And it presents itself in forms that we can understand, right? That we can relate to. That's why it looks like the people of our culture in some way, maybe a more perfected version of, or it can reflect our desires, or, you know, our hopes, our dreams, so our flaws. So I guess, what do you think is the relationship between God and human consciousness?
I guess human consciousness is the container. God is, our consciousness is kind of limited many times. Like, we can work on it best we can, you know, but it's still fairly limited in our capacity, even to our senses, or how much we can know. And I think we do the best we can with our consciousness. But it's gonna be reflective of who we are as people, you know. What is it? There's a song, I think Jaya, you know, from Ananda. There's something about, you might remember better about this. There's something like, to the, you know, to the person who loves horses, God's a horse. You know, to the person who is whatever your dream is, your ideal, your fantasy, that's what God is to you, you know, and that varies probably for each of us in some ways, right? How does that go, Jaya? Do you remember maybe?
I don't remember. I think the analogy might be the drop in the ocean and the infinite sea. Is that kind of what you're, what Bonnie's bringing up, and what you're trying to allude to? That we're just all drops in the ocean, and whatever we're referring to, the omnipotent, is the ocean, and we're just drops of it.
I was kind of thinking, like that. Yeah, no, I was kind of thinking of this like, you know, if you're a musician, God is a piece of music, or is you know, the creator of music. If you're like, I was a biologist, and God was like the ultimate biologist. I was like, man, you're good. I don't know how you made all this stuff, but this is pretty good. You know, if you're an engineer, God's an engineer, you know, it's that kind of thing. It's, you know, as a programmer, like, as a, you know, the universe is a program. They talk about the hologram and, you know, virtual. And so it's like we keep, it's bigger than us in some ways, or smaller than us. You know, there was there was many years ago at Canando, there was a young girl named Riley, and actually it was Jean-Yves Leclerc. You know, Giuseppe, you know Jean-Yves, and it was Jean-Yves' Shuso ceremony, and Riley asked him, you know, what's so great about Zen? Was her question, and his answer was, Zen is very small. So, you know, God's very big and also very small. You know, when you can hide all that stuff inside a cell, you know, it's really, really tiny. Or if you look at, you know, subatomic particles and all that kind of stuff. And so on many, it's whatever we could comprehend. God is limited by what our consciousness can comprehend. I think that's kind of how I take on it. I don't know about the ultimate nature of God. I'm not there yet.
I just want to add some more comments, though. This is fantastic discussion here, and this issue of faith. I've thought about this a lot, you know, and I always think of Buddha saying, you know, don't believe me, don't listen to me just because I'm your teacher. Don't believe what's in the sutras just because they're written down in a fancy book. Find out for yourself. So if I hold my hand up closed like this and I say, I have a rare jewel in my hand, then it's up to you to have faith that I do or not until I open my hand. Then you know whether I do or not. It's not a question of faith. It's not a question of belief. It becomes knowledge. And it seemed like with Buddha, when Buddha said that stuff, that he was talking about knowing. And that's, to me, what the difference between Buddhism and as a practice is, and religions, is they're about belief. And belief always, it implies doubt. Because it's not knowledge. In fact, that's why it's a belief, because you don't know. If you know, it's no longer a belief. And so, you know, and that's sort of, I haven't got it all figured out, but it seems like those kind of things are the things that are floating around in my mind about faith and belief and all that. That's this practice. I came to this practice, I had absolutely no faith in it. I did it because there wasn't anything else I could do. I had read every philosophy book in the library possible, you know, and I still hadn't gotten satisfaction out of that. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to do this. And it does work, you know, but it didn't, for me, it didn't involve faith at all. It was just, I'm going to do it, whether it works or not. We'll see. And you know, we talk about us being the drops in the ocean, but I think at the same time, the ocean is the drop. You know, drops in oceans, you know, that's just a way of describing something, you know, it's a drop or it's an ocean. But
that's what that's what they say.
Yeah. And anyway, but just, I don't know, how do you feel about that, about this, my idea about, you know, the faith playing this role, where I think Buddha's thing was to take us beyond belief and faith, to take us to knowledge, to knowing. And, but anyway, you know, that's sort of what I see the practice as, is it's about knowledge. It's about knowing. But,
yes. I agree with you. I agree with you, Don.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
May I jump in? May I jump in?
Yes, please, Jaya.
Yeah, I've often wondered about what Buddha thought when he abandoned, because he was raised with such strong Hindu principles, and then obviously he abandoned all of that. And I've often wondered, when he abandoned all the rituals and took personal responsibility, which I think, Don, you're talking about, is like taking personal responsibility. he took personal responsibility for his spiritual well-being and for developing his own spiritual knowledge base, as you put it. But at that point, when he did that, did he really abandon the idea that there was something greater than himself? And
yeah, I think he did.
I mean, I've kind of come to this thought that he didn't abandon that. He believed in that, so there was something greater than himself. But his point was that let's not dwell on it, because if we do, then we abandon our own personal responsibility.
I think questions of greater than himself, he didn't even deal with. Was of no interest to him. You know, he doesn't even believe in this self. You know, he had the thing about the whole, no, there is no self. And I think the question of whether there was something greater than our so-called selves or not was something he was completely not interested in. You know, he was interested in this way that leads to knowledge. You know, questions like where did the universe come from, or where did we come from, or what happens to us after we die. I believe, from what I read anyway from my Buddhist readings, those questions he had absolutely no interest in. And yeah, I think he would probably have avoided answering them, you know, but that's just my take on it. I don't know, you know.
It reminds me of who shot the arrow. Doesn't matter until you get the arrow out, right?
That's it.
Yeah. Jaya? Would you like to answer that?
I'm sorry, answer.
There was a you get another shot at it. Answer how you feel that the Buddha did or didn't believe in God. I don't know. I don't know if the Buddha did.
I guess mine just comes from, given that he grew up and the way he was raised and the way, yes, he abandoned the rituals. And I just feel, I don't know, I guess I can't imagine someone who till the age of 30 was strongly entrenched in following, you know, believing in something of a higher order. I just have a hard time trying to wrap that he completely abandoned that. It was something he said that, like, I think I'd agree with Dawn, that don't dwell on it. He didn't dwell on it. He said, and that's the idea, is that not to dwell on it and to take personal responsibility. And that's kind of where I've come out on it, is to not dwell on God, but rather focus on what we have to do here and now, and do the best we can for ourselves and for those around us. And that's because I think that's what he ended up doing. So anyhow, that's kind of,
yeah, thank you.
My two bits.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dawn and Jaya. So next we have Nili and then Colleen.
Hey everyone.
Hi Nili.
Just talking a little comment about what Jay said. Actually, I remember that in the book of What the Buddha Taught, there were some questions that the Buddha never answered. And one of them was, is there a God? So I think that we will never know the answer from him. But I was wondering too, and this is a question for all of you. I think that I was also born in a Catholic family, and I think that some thinking that kind of make me struggle about whether I believe or not is, for example, what happens when you get a lot of good things happening to you. So obviously Christian people would say that that's God, something that God did, right? Something that is kind of a blessing. So I'm wondering, how do you approach those situations? How do you explain them?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand, Nelly, the question. How to explain good fortune?
Yeah, but if you are not a believer of God.
Well, gosh, I think both good fortune and bad fortune are difficult to explain. If you're a believer or a non-believer, they're like, on the one hand, bad things happen to good people, and on the other hand, very good things happen to bad people. So you're like, okay, I mean, there's probably complex interrelationships between things. That's what we learned from Buddhism, right? The interdependent origination. Everything's interrelated and related through causes and conditions. And we can't see all those threads. We can't see all that. We can't see all that all of us are and what we're related to. And so I don't think that we can comment on that little portion that we're seeing. You don't even see all of someone's life. They might be miserable in one part of their life, and they might have what appears to be good fortune in another. We know sometimes, stars, famous stars, they have horrible, personal lives. So I think it's just complicated. I don't think that anybody can say, this is very good or this is very bad. I think that's kind of what Buddhism teaches us, to kind of try to go beyond that. Don't judge things by appearances, because there's so many factors. Although you have to look at what you create, try to create something. But I think, be careful in judging. I think just kind of keep an open mind that maybe you're not seeing the full story.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of how I try to think about it.
Thank you.
Dave?
Yeah, just a couple of follow-on remarks about things that other people have said. I think there's general agreement going all the way back to what Diane started out with, that there's this almost universal sort of longing that lies behind different kinds of faith, different kinds of religion. And it tends to show up, as Bonnie was saying, in the form of the spiritual entity that's in charge looks a lot like us. Very anthropomorphic, in fact, like our tribe. And that there are a lot of people who tried to explain this, all the way from, that's just evidence that God exists and is trying to make himself known to us, or itself or herself, all the way to, things like there's a branch of cognitive psychology, the cognitive psychology of religion, that tries to explain the whole thing in terms of evolutionary mechanisms in the brain. I don't want to launch into any of that right now, but I just wanted to cite a couple of interesting sort of side effects of that. One thing that the evolutionary psychology of religion people talk about is the fact that in sort of modern sophisticated circles, where people say that God isn't really anthropomorphic, God is a spirit, the sort of Paul Tillich ground of being kind of idea, that when people who profess that kind of belief aren't sort of on the spot, they aren't really on their toes, it's amazing how they lapse back into a sort of anthropomorphic discussion of what God wants and God loves and God's plans and God this and God that. It all sounds very, very anthropomorphic. And the idea that Buddha sort of walked away from all of that and said, we don't really have to think about that. There are, of course, branches of Buddhism other than Zen where, to a greater or lesser extent, a lot of that stuff has sort of come roaring back in. And they tend to get, and there's a wonderful quote from Stephen Batchelor. He says, the greatest weakness of Buddhism is that it's always on the verge of just turning back into just another religion. So there does seem to be, for wherever you think it comes from, there does seem to be some very strange anthropomorphic yearning in us that wants an explanation of somebody who's like us and is responsible for everything and is going to take good care of us.
Yeah, we want to grasp that certainty. We want some certainty in our world, just a little bit.
Yes, and of course, at least in the context of Christianity, we call this Christian humility.
the questions, I want one more comment, I'll shut up. We have these questions, but these questions come from a place, and they come from a place of ignorance. For example, the question, does God exist or doesn't God exist? People who believe in the earth is flat have a question. They could have a question, let's say, does it go on forever? Or does it have an edge? The question, it turns out, is absolutely meaningless. It's generated by a belief in the flat earth. And the question of things like if God exists or not, or is there even such a thing as existence or non-existence, there's a certain assumption that we're making that that's what's it is. Ultimately, it's some people refer to this as the assumption of substantiality. That there's something there's something rather than nothing. This is the question scientists always are asking: why is there something instead of nothing? Well, it's not something and it's not nothing. The assumption that it has to be something or nothing, is what generates the question. The question, actually, when you see, it's hard to explain, but when you see, that it's not something and it's not nothing, then the question is no longer applies. It's not there. I don't know if that's clear or I'm confusing anybody. I probably am, but you understand what I'm saying? A lot of questions come from our assumptions that we make, or does God exist or he doesn't exist? There's a belief system there. There's an assumption there that's our choices. And but it's you can see beyond that, and then like the question of what happens to us after we die? If you have an experience of no self, or I don't even know what you'd call it, but there's trees and wind in the trees and bugs in the grass and dirt on the ground and you and life and death and blah, blah, blah. The question just loses all meaning. It's not even a legitimate question at that point. Does that make any sense to anybody, or am I just confusing everybody?
It sounds like you're describing more of a non-duality, right? Non-dualistic perspective.
I wouldn't even involve the assumption of duality or non-duality.
Yeah.
It's both, that's, that's, not it either. From my point of view, now, not who the hell knows what that means, but, we get into these concepts of duality and non-duality and existence and non-existence and all that stuff. It kind of reminds me of the whirlpool thing, there's a whirlpool in the stream, but I guarantee you can't put a bucket down in that stream and take that whirlpool out of it. It ain't gonna be there, So, I met this Alan Watts one time. I spent a couple of days hanging out with him and stuff, and he kept saying this thing about how infinity has these forms, and I was like, how in the hell can infinity have a form? It's limitless, And he started pointing to things in the room, and he said, it has precisely that form and that form and that form, So, anyway, I hope I haven't been too confusing here. So,
I think, thank you. I think you said it perfectly.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Brenda, can I ask? I just wanted to share something. When I was growing up, I used to go to a Sufi teacher. And one day I was sitting with him and he said, let me tell you something today. I said, okay. So this is going to be dangerous. He said, yes, it is dangerous. So there was this this man, he's a very religious man. He was a philosopher and he was a thinker and he was a scholar. His name was Mansur al-Dallaj. And he got onto a level where he could talk to God. So he said to God, tell me your secret. And God said, are you sure? I said, no. So, okay, when you're sure, come back. Second time he goes and he asks the same question. He said, are you sure? He said, yes. And God says, okay, go away. Come back again. So this goes on for like 3 times. And third time he said, yes, I'm absolutely sure. I want to know the secret of you. So God says, okay. So God reveals it to him. And he is so overwhelmed by this, he runs out of his house yelling, I am God, I am God, I am God, and people stone him to death. So that is the real secret, but we don't go around talking about it. And that's the whole thing. In that there is the whole idea of ego too, and knowing that you are God and you can create, but you don't go around telling other people that you're God. And so he said, just remember that whatever you do, don't let that ego come in that tells you that you are God. You know, God is working through you. You are a part of him, but don't let the ego come out. But it's so I was just thinking I'll share that today because that seemed appropriate. It's something that people don't look at. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Umar. Thank you.
Well, this has been a very, very lively discussion. Brenda, do you have any comments to Dave or Don or Umar, or we good?
Oh gosh, what could I possibly comment to? So much wisdom. Thank you. I don't think I have any comments. Thank you. I'm thankful for all of you.
So Umar, the secret is that we are all God, but we shouldn't tell people or they might stone us or crucify us, right?
Yeah.
Great.
As Les says, just take care of things, that's all we can do. Yeah.
Be very quiet gods. Be very quiet,
exactly.
subtle gods. Any last questions or comments? This was a very fascinating discussion. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for your comments and questions.
Do we have any newcomers tonight? Anyone here for the first time? Okay. All right. Why don't we, let's see. I'm gonna unmute everyone, or actually first let's do announcements. Sorry, I'm skipping all over the place. Do we have any announcements? Teresa and then Vanessa.
Yeah, next week speaker will be Travis, and also on the 13th we have holiday parties. So I am still looking for volunteers to present something, either read a poem or share a picture or anything. So if anybody wants to share something during the holiday party, please email me. And Doug is collecting pictures, music, poems for a slideshow. Thank you.
That's the 13th. That's a Sunday after next. What time again?
4 p.m.
4 p.m. Okay, good. Thank you. Vanessa?
Yes. So the 8th of December is the date that Buddhists mark the awakening of the Buddha. It's called Rohatsu, that holiday. And to mark it this year at Canando, we're going to have an overnight sitting on Zoom. We're not going to do it on the 8th because it's the middle of the week. It's a school night, and it might be inconvenient for a lot of people. But we'll have it on the night of the Saturday, which is the 5th of December. That's this coming Saturday, and it'll be here on Zoom at the same address, starting at 10 p.m. and it's going to run until 5 o'clock the next morning. And there was a little schedule that went out with the newsletter last week, and it's also on the website. So you can see there are a couple of breaks within the schedule. So if you would like to join for any of it or all of it, it's at the usual address, and we'll be there to offer that. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. All right, well, why don't we quickly go around and introduce ourselves. I'm Bonnie.
Aaron.
Giuseppe.
Aline.
Nick.
Diane.
Dave.
Brenda. Columbine.
Don.
Travis.
Nearly.
Sabine.
And
Didi.
Teresa.
Is that everyone? Well, thank you everyone for joining tonight. And just a quick reminder that this has been recorded. And there's a couple gaps in the recording, I think, when my Wi-Fi cut out. Sorry about that tonight. But if you have anything confidential that you would like removed, just shoot me a quick chat message before you take off tonight. And looking forward to see you all next time. So.